Greetings, programs, and welcome to, well, what is meant to be a quick and dirty introduction to CK2, because as of me recording this, Paradox is giving the game away free on Steam for at least a few days. Now, it's just the base game. There's a whole bunch of DLC with this game as well, but I've decided to sit down and try and do an introductory video because A, it's something I've been meaning to do for a while, and this is a really good opportunity to do it. And B, well, I have actually tried in the past, but I've tried to take the approach of doing it really comprehensively and trying to cover everything. And that's quite difficult with CK2 because it has a lot of moving parts. And this is one of the things that puts people off about it, is that it seems like a very complicated game. But I would say it's not necessarily complicated. It does have a lot of moving parts, but the core gameplay isn't actually that difficult to grasp. And so rather than try and be ultra comprehensive, I'm just going to give the best advice I can on getting started in the game for the first time. And for everything else, I can only suggest that you refer to the wiki, or wikis even, because there are multiples of them. And hell, I've got nearly 1,000 hours logged in Steam, and possibly a little more than that on copied out versions that have been modded, and I still have to go and look stuff up on the wiki sometimes because it's difficult to remember everything. I'm sure there are players out there that do remember everything about how this game works, but I'm not one of them. So before we even start with loading up a new game, I'm going to click on the options menu and just show you that this is where the game's difficulty setting resides, and it's the primary difficulty setting. There's a whole bunch of other settings that we will get to, but in this menu, and this is the only place you can change it, you can't change it once you've actually started a game. This is the menu where you basically select if you as the player get any bonuses or if the AI gets any bonuses. And this right here, by the way, this is an important feature of this game. There is a lot of information in tooltips, so pay attention to that. But for our purposes, we're just going to go with what I normally go with, which is a normal difficulty game where basically I don't get any bonuses, the AI doesn't get any bonuses beyond one or two helping hands, because, you know, AI in strategy games tends to need a little bit of help. So this is the base game, absolutely no DLC whatsoever. That's one of the things that was kind of holding me back about doing a video like this is, you know, do I do it just the base game? Do I try and talk about what I think are the most important DLC, or do I do separate videos for all the DLC, at which point I'm just, you know, basically reading out wiki pages, kinda. So what I'll do is I'll flash up on screen the DLC that I think are the most important for this game, that add the most features that a player might find useful. But there's a whole bunch of like cosmetic stuff beyond that, and there's some of the stuff that adds gameplay that you might want to consider much further down the line, but isn't really going to be that useful to a new player. So, I'm going to click the game, and it actually gives us some bookmarks essentially. Now, we can't pick the earliest two bookmarks because those are part of DLC, but from 1066 onwards to the latest bookmark, 1337, well, we'll click on 1066 and it gives a list of suggested characters, but what we're going to do is hit custom game setup, which will just give us a map of Europe. And the first thing I want to point out is these buttons up here. You can basically change the date, and if I actually change the map mode, we'll be able to see the political map of Europe shifting, so I can just flick along by a month after month, or I can even do it by decade, and you can see things shifting around. But we'll stick with the earliest 1066 start date, because this goes back to the original Crusader Kings, which took William the Conqueror's invasion of England as its start point. CK2 actually starts a little before that, so you can choose to be Harold Godwin and try and fight off the simultaneous invasions from Duke of Normandy and the Kingdom of Norway. Now, because there aren't any DLC, you can basically only play as Catholic or Orthodox Christian characters, or Miaphysite characters, basically any of the kind of the Christian faiths. There are a whole bunch of other faiths on the map, as you can see. There is, well, at the moment it's mostly Sunni Muslims, but you know, there's some Shia Muslim controlled areas as well. There are some various air quotes pagan controlled areas on the map. There's some Zoroastrian areas, but there's, I think, only one actual Zoroastrian ruler that you can start with. And then down in India, you've got Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, as well as, I don't even know how to pronounce that, but the Tibetan religion at the time, because this is the most recent update added a whole bunch of stuff here, and this all just used to be, terra incognita as far as the player was concerned. But you can't play any of that. You basically are stuck with the kind of Western Christian characters. And, well, that's fine. That's actually a really good place to start with this game, because it's going to be the most comprehensible. It's a good way to get your feet wet, and then later on you could maybe get a DLC that lets you play as an Islamic character, for instance. So for a starting player, the common advice is go with Ireland, which basically lets you pick a relatively low pressure environment, and you can fight your way up to become the King of Ireland from being a count, and it's a good way to learn the mechanics. Other interesting places that you might want to think about are the Iberian Peninsula, where you can have various bits of skullduggery going on amongst the three brothers that control the three Spanish kingdoms. You've also got Croatia being not a terrible choice, because it sits between Byzantium and the HRE, and you've got some room to expand to the north, but you've also got this balancing act of keeping these guys happy here, because they might throw their weight around a bit otherwise. Sweden is not a bad choice. And actually, that's the one I'm going to be going with for this, demonstration. And then, well, you don't have to play as, the top-level ruler. You can play as somebody's vassal. So if I click, say, dukes, I could be the Duke of Bohemia. I could be a vassal of the Holy Roman Empire and actually try and, if I so chose, maneuver my way up to be the Holy Roman Emperor. And that kind of leads me into saying, well, this game, it is kind of whatever you want it to be. You can go from the scope of literally trying to take over the entire map, which is possible, or you can play the single lifetime of a single character. You basically start and stop wherever you want to, and so you don't have to make this game all about constant war, constant conquest. There are other ways to play this game, so it really does come down to what do you as a player want to do. So as I said, I'm going to swick Peden, or possibly pick Sweden, and that gives me a reasonably, it's not a super difficult start. The game does actually try to approximate the starting difficulty for you. So if I choose like a Welsh Duke there, for instance, that's going to be slightly harder, or maybe one of the Breton. In fact, that's the lone independent Breton count at the moment, so that's considered quite a difficult start. Going as the King of France, for example, relatively easy. Although you've still got, if you are the ruler of a big kingdom, you're still going to have to do a lot of vassal management, and that's why it's not necessarily a good idea to immediately jump in and be the King of France or be the King of England. But Sweden isn't huge in terms of its, number of vassals, in terms of its size, in terms of its influence to start with. So it's a decent one to pick in terms of, possible future expansion. Now, you do also have like bookmarks beyond the ones that we saw at the start there. I thought I'd just point that out as well. But we're going to stick with 1066, and we're going to hit the play button, and we'll see what happens. And what does happen is this screen comes up. Now, this, alongside the, I mean, we saw what the game difficulty setting does in the main menu. This screen here for the game rules, this has a huge influence on how you're going to play. I'm not going to go through all of them individually. I would recommend going to the wiki for that. But there are some that do have quite a big effect that you might want to consider turning off as a first-time player. Now, one of them is secret religious cults, which you as a player can't do anything with without any DLC. Or at least I don't think you can do much with. I think you need the Monks and Mystics DLC to be able to go and do things with that. But the AI still can, and there's still various things that can happen, and you can end up people with characters professing one faith and secretly following another faith, and you can end up with some fairly ridiculous things happening as a result. So personally, for a first time player, I would recommend turning that off. Shattered Retreat is one that a lot of people don't particularly like. It means that armies, when you beat them, get to just run away. a lot of the time. There are various rules involved with that, but a lot of people prefer to have that turned off, and there is that option, so you can just do that. The other one that you might want to turn off is this one here, supernatural events. If you've seen screenshots of, the world ruled by horses, for example, or screenshots of people having satanic children or making ritual sacrifices, all that kind of thing, and becoming immortal. Your character can become immortal. All of that is governed by this particular setting here. And if you turn it on, well, that's fine. Things can get a little bit silly, but you might, if you're wanting to just play this through and get a handle on the base game, you might want to turn this off. You've also got this thing here, which is, that just kind of turns it up to 11 if you set it to be unrestricted. But personally, I would turn that off. Some of the other settings do have quite a big impact, though. But for the most part, the default settings are pretty much fine. Just to give an example that really is a very obvious example, if you scroll all the way down the bottom, you get this one here, the domain size. Now, the domain is your personal holdings, the amount of land that you, as a ruler, can personally hold. If you go over that limit, it comes with some penalties, and so you're playing as a feudal ruler. The whole point of it is that you delegate and you give some of that land to vassals, and those vassals then, in times of war, give you manpower. They give you armies that contribute to your own. But what you can do is actually use this setting here to play it more like another strategy game, say EU4, for example, or any other strategy game that involves also conquest, where you just basically can hold as many pieces of land as you want to directly without having to offload them onto vassals. So that makes a huge difference, because suddenly there are no penalties for having a huge kingdom that you control directly, and that allows you to get lots of taxation income directly and lots of big, you can directly raise really big armies without having to worry about your vassal's opinion of you. So that alone just massively changes how the game would play. And you might notice this particular option, having set it to unlimited, it's gone red. Well, if you want to get any of the Steam achievements for this game, you need to click this button here. You need to turn on the Ironman mode, and some settings are incompatible with Ironman mode. Personally, I don't bother because it restricts also your ability to save and load the game. So if you want to save scum a bit, don't have Ironman mode loaded up, but or not loaded up, turned on. But that's how you do it. That's how you get Steam achievements for this game. So we're going to start the game, and it will take us actually into the map. And excuse the clattering of my cup mat. So the intro screen gives you just a brief idea of what the game is about, because as I've intimated, it's a strategy game, but it's a strategy game of two parts. You've got the traditional stuff of warfare and expansion, but you've also got the entire aspect of the game centered around the dynasty of your character. And the whole thing is that you not only have to keep your kingdom going, but you have to keep your dynasty going, and you have to make sure that people of your dynasty inherit, because you can lose by being conquered by other kingdoms, but you can also lose if your dynasty runs out of land, essentially. If you become an unlanded character or your dynasty dies out without any heirs, that's it. That's also game over. So it's equally as important to, take care of the side of things in terms of marriages as it is taking new bits of land. So if we click next there, it'll give us the rules screen, and this is just it tells you at a glance the rules for your particular type of ruler. So in this case, we're a Swedish Catholic king. Well, Swedish doesn't give us any culture effects other than we can raid overseas. But I think that also, I think we're restricted because we're Catholic. So I think that kind of cancels that out. But if you have the old gods, you can basically play as Vikings. Yeah, you can play as Vikings, and you can send your Viking raiders around the place, and you can take other people's money, which is kind of a fun thing to do. So this tells you the kind of holdings that you can hold, and different various rules that are involved with being feudal, and then there's the various rules involved with being Catholic, a lot of which revolve around the Pope. Now, you can also actually have a refresh of the rules that you've set up from this screen. And once you close that, if you want to refer back to it at any point, it's this little button up here. And you click that and hey presto, it comes back up. So that's not just, gone the first time you click it away. That's always available to you. And those rules can change. Let's say this character became an Orthodox Christian. That might have some effect on the various things that this character can do. So as I've said, it's all based around the character. So this is the character screen, this is you. When this character dies, you will move on to play as whoever the heir is. And in this case, it's this son here. We've got 4 sons already. And anybody of your dynasty has got this little blood drop, so they're recognisable at a glance. But in this case, the little crown means that he's my direct heir. So if I died right now, it would be this guy that would take the throne. So not only have you got to worry about your own character, but you've got to worry about who's going to inherit. And this is where marriage becomes a very important component of this game, because you're not only looking to marry people that have land or claims that you can use on pieces of land. There's also that thing where you're looking for people with good stats, because all characters in this game have their own set of primary stats, and then they've got some modifiers going on here as well. And I won't go into it in detail. Again, I will refer you to the wiki, because it will have in fact, it does have a comprehensive list of all the different traits and what they mean. But generally speaking, green is good, red is bad in terms of personal traits, and all characters also have an educational trait. And in this case, it is a martial trait. So the 2 little blobs, and it can be up to 4 little, pips there. If it's a 4 pipper, that means they've received a very good education, or they took to it very well, and that gives bigger bonuses than, say, a 1 pip education. So in this case, 2 pips is not bad. 1 pips generally comes with some downsides. Even 4 pips can come with some downsides. 2, for instance, here I actually have +3 martial but -1 learning, and this actually modifies my primary stats here. I also get some benefit from being married. You should always try and be married, just from the point of view that it gives you a bump to your own primary stats. And then there are these numbers in brackets as well, and these represent your state scores. So that's your own scores plus that of your council, if I can remember which button that is. So this is partly how you rule your kingdom, is you have various councillors that you appoint to positions. And basically, each of these, it fits in with whatever area they're highest in. So this guy is, if we click the appoint button, we can bring up this screen. We can see he is by far the best. He's got the best diplomacy skill of anybody who is in my court. So we've made this guy the chancellor, or the game has made this guy the chancellor. But there can be other considerations. Sometimes you might want to give an heir a position on the council because they'll like it, or you might want to give them a wealthy, a powerful landowner a position, because it can keep them on side. It can keep them happy, because that's a very important component of this game, is keeping your vassals happy. Now, another very important component is the laws of your realm. And the one that you're most going to be concerned with, at least to start with, is the succession laws. Now, here in Sweden, we have, and again you can mouse over, we have an agnatic, cognatic, elective set of laws, which means that I and my other vassals, alongside my vassals, get to basically vote through who we want to be the next king. And there are various different kinds of laws, and as you can see, you can mouse over all of them and see what they do. And again, you can read in more detail on the wiki. But a lot of rulers, especially with the earlier start dates, the 769 and the 8 whatever it is start date, they will start with Gavelkind, which is generally speaking one you want to get away with, or away from. Gavelkind basically splits up your realm when your main character dies, and one of the things you're always trying to do in this game is keep all of your titles together as much as possible, because if your kingdom is constantly splitting every time the ruler dies, then you're only going to end up getting weaker and weaker in the long run. So one of the things that is important with laws is you can't just change the laws willy-nilly. You have to have a cooldown or a waiting period. So there are also sometimes other considerations, and you can mouse over and see. In this case, well, because we have a vassal with a negative opinion and we have to have reigned for at least 10 years, we can't actually change any of these at the moment. But we will be able to at some point. But some of them have other considerations. So if I want to set up seniority succession, whereby it would always be the oldest member of the dynasty that would inherit, that is a little bit more complicated, as you can see. But laws are important, and you should always check what laws you have and then try and figure out what laws you want to have and then how you're going to get there. And it basically is a matter of looking at what the different considerations are and figuring out what you need to do. So some of them, for instance, ultimogeniture is going to need higher crown authority than we have at the moment. And so it's going to take a little while to change that, because there are other different kinds of laws. The inheritance laws are the ones you're most immediately concerned with, but there are also realm laws. And we can actually change one of those right now. So at the moment we're on minimal crown authority, which actually gives a bonus to the opinion that other vassals and characters in my court have of me. And so, we're basically, giving them a fairly free hand. We're not imposing our authority too much, and everybody's fairly happy with that. But that doesn't give you, the player, as much power as, say, having maximum laws would have, because, as you can see, well, that gives you a much bigger levy. When you raise troops from your vassals, they will give you far more of them if you have the absolute crown authority laws. So there's always that tension. Your vassals are always going to want stuff to be your crown authority laws to be down at this end. You as the player are more often going to want your crown authority laws to be up at this end. But for now, well, we can only try and go to low crown authority. So we're actually going to click on that, and it will give plus 20% bonus to any levies raised, but it also gives a slight malus to the opinion. So we'll try and get that through, and all my vassals basically have to vote on it. So if you're a really unpopular ruler, it's not going to be easy to get any laws changed. You basically are going to have to bribe people or give them land or even bump people off. Because assassinations are it's quite a big part of this game sometimes. If you have somebody that's really irking you or somebody that's just really in your way, then that's an option. You can assassinate them. The other laws available there, well, because we're Christian, we have the option of appointing our own bishops, or basically letting the Pope appoint bishops, and obviously the Pope really likes that option, and he will pressure you at some point to have that option if you don't have it already. You can just ignore him, but it will come at a penalty. As you can see, you get minus 30 opinion with the Pope. Lastly, on this screen, you have the centralization sliders, and this affects, you can actually see there, you get at the lower end, you actually can have more vassals, which is what this number here is. You can mouse over. So at the moment, I can have a maximum of 32 vassals, which is, 10 higher than it would be if I had low centralization, or 5 higher than it would be, because it drops down. But the flip side is that as you go up and have the higher centralization laws, you can then hold more land directly. But there's also technologies that affect that as well. So you've got a combination of technologies and laws that let you hold more land directly at a penalty of having fewer vassals. Lastly, there's obligations, and this screen changes a little bit depending on if you have various DLC or not. I think it's Conclave that changes all this. If you've got Conclave, the council screen is going to look a bit different as well. But this basically lets you fine-tune whether you want more money or more levies from your different kinds of vassals. And whatever options you pick here, it's either going to have a positive opinion modifier or a negative opinion modifier alongside, more troops or more money or whatever. So by default, basically, your feudal vassals, your landed lords are not going to give you any money, but they will give you levies, they will give you troops. And then for your other kinds, they'll give you a mix of both. and you can fine-tune that so that, say, your cities give you a lot of cash but not a lot of levies, and therefore, you can offset the opinion, the minus opinion from one with the bonus from the other kind of thing. You can fine-tune it a bit that way. But to start off with, you're not going to need to worry about that too much. Now, I've talked about opinion a bunch. It's basically, and if I even just click on my wife for an example, it's this number here. And you will see this in a number of places. So in this case, because she's in my court, we actually have it listed up here as well. And we also have my opinion of her. Me and my wife don't apparently like each other all that much. And that's going to be a combination of these kind of personality factors, let's call them. A mixture of like physical factors and personality factors that are all listed here. So we can actually mouse over and see exactly what it is. And okay, I get a +6 from personal diplomacy, which is this score here, my diplomacy score. But we also have a -20 from title claimant, and that's because she has a weak claim on the Kingdom of Sweden itself. And this modifies over time. You can give people gifts, you can give people minor titles, which is actually something I didn't cover, but there's various, you can make somebody the Keeper of the Swans or the Court Jester, which they won't like very much. The one important thing on this screen is commanders, and commanders are generals, basically. You only have a limited number of them. If you're a duke, I think you only get 3 or 4 available. As a king, there's 6. I can't remember if anything in the laws screen modifies this, but generally speaking, the higher the level your primary title, the more commanders that you can have. So you can have armies that don't have a general attached to them, leading them, but they will obviously fight worse than armies that do. So as a king, we can select people that fight well to be our commanders. And this also, you can, if there's a character you don't like very much, for instance, even though they might be a really terrible commander, even though they might have a really terrible martial score, this is an option, by the way. This is one way you can get rid of them, is you put them in charge of an army and you send them into a lot of fights. Or maybe you put them in charge of an army and go and sit that army in a province where there is disease happening, at which point they have a heightened chance of actually catching said disease, and then they might keel over and die. So you don't just have to assassinate people to get rid of them. There are other ways you can do it as well. This is what I mean when I say this game has a lot of moving parts. So let's, for argument's sake, I think I should be able to appoint my wife as High Almoner. There we go. Some you can give to male or female characters, but a lot of them it's male characters only. There are gender equality laws. That's one of the things you can set up at the start of the game. Normally there's a restriction based on either religion or culture, but it is possible to override that and have basically equality laws just across the board, so that women can inherit the same as men, women can lead armies, women can occupy any council position. You can do that. That's another way in which you can drastically change the game if you so choose. So in this case, we're going to make my wife the High Almoner, and that actually, if we mouse over, comes with a little prestige bump for her, gives me +5 opinion with her, and she also gets a small monthly salary out of it, and she's going to like me more as a result. So that's now gone to -9 as a result of that. So those are, little things you can hand out to people in order to just give them that little bit of extra opinion with you. So if I look on this screen here, the character screen, this is the quickest way of seeing what vassals you have. I mean, you can also look at it on the map as well. If I click on... No, that would be de jure duchies. Oh, I know how I do it. So yeah, this is the default realm view. If you mouse over just any of your provinces and you look at the pop-up, you'll see that if I control and left click, suddenly I can see, okay, I hold these bits of lands myself, and these other bits are held by vassals. So if I control right click, that brings that back. So there's various information that you get from the map itself, and some of these, some of these information modes have kind of sub-modes within them that you get through various combinations of pressing the keyboard and left clicking or right clicking. So there's a lot of information buried in the game that's maybe not necessarily immediately obvious. It used to be it was just these buttons here, and then they added the various map modes as well, the sub map modes that you could get to. So that can be quite useful if you want to see, like click on the HRE, for example. We can see all the various constituent parts of the HRE, and if I look, for instance, within the Duchy of Bohemia, I can do the same again, and I can see, okay, that's held by the Duke, and then he's got 2 counts that hold those bits of land underneath him. So, that information is all available, and it's all very, very useful. But one of the main ways, probably the easiest way to directly interact with a vassal from like a centralized place is just to look on the vassals tab of your character screen, and you can sort them by their rank. So I can look at my dukes, for example, or I can sort them by their opinion of me. So I can see that this duke here, the Duke of Upland, doesn't like me very much. So he's someone I have to keep an eye on. He's someone I have to try and raise the opinion of. And you can actually mouse over and see why it is they don't like me. And one of the reasons actually there is that my domain is too big. And that brings me up to this number up here. Now this is governed by, I believe, the stewardship stat. Is that also has an effect on how much land you can directly hold. And in this case, I'm holding 3 provinces, but my skill level means I can only hold 1. And I think at the moment we probably have a modifier. There we go. We have a modifier from being ill. So this is probably a temporary thing. I don't need to worry about this, especially. In the long run, this would not be good, because it would mean I would basically have to give these bits of lands away to vassals, or create new vassals in order to get rid of that negative opinion. And it also has an effect on how much money I make. That actually has an impact on kind of like the efficiency of your realm if you hold too much land directly. So that's not something you want, especially. But in this case, it probably is because I am ill. And once that goes away, either through me dying or the character just recovering, that should go back up to 3 out of 3, I am hoping. So that's some of the basics. We'll, I guess, take a look at we'll go through the rest of the screens here, and then I'll maybe point out some of what's going up on here as well, because this is where the game kind of gives you various notifications about things. You also get the messages that pop up on this side. For instance, this is you've got your important messages, then you've got low priority messages, and you can actually change whether you want various messages to be high or low priority, and that's just by right clicking on that panel there. But generally speaking, those ones, will flash when one pops up, but won't actually show you, whereas the high priority messages will pop out and show you. There's also a log. If you click on this down here, you can basically see, and there we go, Queen Ingrid has become the High Almoner, and it's got various other messages relating to just stuff that the game's telling me right away. But this log here also gives you information about other realms as well. So sometimes it's useful to have this open, but mostly I just ignore that. It's just so that you know it's there. So onto technology. There is a fairly rudimentary technology system in this game, and it basically ticks away in the background, and you more or less don't really have anything to do with it directly. Once these bars fill up, essentially, once you get enough points, you can select if you want to invest those points into one of these specific areas, and they all have different effects. So castle infrastructure, for instance, lets me build things in my holdings that I wasn't able to before. It lets me upgrade to new levels, let's put it that way. Sometimes it does let you build whole new buildings, but generally speaking, anything that's infrastructure is fairly high priority. Legalism is a fairly high priority because that affects your centralization and crown authority laws, as you can see. There are ones that give you opinion bonuses with your various vassal types, so those can be useful under certain circumstances. The military ones all have an effect. They're all fairly important as well, and it all generally, as I said, ticks away in the background, apart from you can specifically send your spy master And this is something I didn't really mention with the council, is that they can do various things. I can send my spy master to study technology in, say, let's go the HRE. So I've posted them there, and that can have various different effects. And as you can see when you mouse over, there's a 20% chance yearly that I will get some kind of pop-up that says you've gotten some technology points. Or the spy master could be discovered and kicked out. So there are positives and negatives, and it's all based on yearly percentages, essentially, which can be a little bit annoying in some ways, but we'll get to that more on the when I'm talking about the military. The main one where it can be quite annoying is if you're using one of the Chancellor's most important functions, which is to fabricate claims. And because it's this yearly chance to happen, it might happen in 5 minutes, or it might take, an hour. And sometimes you can be sat there waiting for your Chancellor to try and fabricate a claim, and it doesn't even happen within the lifetime of your character or within the Chancellor's lifetime. So it is kind of like chance, essentially. And the game is basically checking every so often to see, is this going to happen now? And it's more or less, flipping a coin. And the higher that base chance is, then the better chance that you'll get the outcome that you want every time the game flips a coin. So sometimes you can end up waiting a long time, other times it'll happen right away, and you've really no way of knowing. But this is why having higher skilled characters in their respective areas as your councillors really helps out a lot. So anyway, back to technology. One thing you can do here, and this is where the tech map mode is hidden away, is you can see, for instance, let's click on, legalism. And we can see how people have progressed across the map. And generally, the lighter the colour, the kind of the higher the technology progression. So if I mouse over here, for example, I can see these people have, for legalism specifically, they're kind of halfway up, but I can't send my spy master that far. So generally speaking, having put my spy master there in Germany, I probably should have put them in Italy, and I would have had a better chance of gleaning some technology points, because they're a bit more advanced than we are here in Sweden. You'll also notice some of these are kind of moving themselves and others aren't. I think that is purely based on the game year versus the technology level. And the game has kind of set points as far as, you should be at this level at this year kind of thing. And so if you are behind that curve, then you will get a kind of very slow gain into those technology levels anyway, which is what's happening here with basically all of our culture advances. But that's not true with the military tech level, and so we're not getting that same benefit. We're just, as you see there, 0% chance per year to increase by 0.1%, whereas that is at the moment 1.3%. And that's actually because we've posted our spy master. So in fact, that purely is from the spy master, that bonus. I think it can happen anyway. I might be wrong about that, actually. This is one of those times when I would have to go and look up the wiki, because this is kind of me assuming, how it works, or maybe how it worked once upon a time. But the game's, it's been out for 6 years. They have made some changes to the core mechanics here and there in that time. So I might be going on old information when I said what I said. It might be purely down to the spy master these days in terms of getting this slow gain of points, or the chance of a slow gain at points. So next, the military screen, and one of the important features in terms of the military is actually locked away behind a DLC. I think it's the Republic. Can't remember exactly, but retinues are basically a small standing army that supplements your regular military forces, and they are incredibly useful. That is one of the reasons why I recommended that DLC in particular, is just to get retinues. But otherwise, you can see on the levy screen, you can see your own troops that you can directly raise, and then the troops that you can raise from your vassals. And the more your vassals like you, the more their lands are developed, and also obviously depending on the laws that you have, that number can go up. But generally speaking, it's a good idea to at least be on a par, if not have more troops that you can raise than your vassals. Now, bear in mind, when we look at these numbers here, that's not the entire number of troops that your vassals can raise. That's the number that they're willing to give you if you raise them. If they raise them themselves, it could be a much higher number. But generally speaking, one of the ways to have a stable kingdom is to be able to muster a reasonably large army, because one of the things that can trigger vassals rebelling against you is if you are militarily weak. They will take that as a sign that they can safely attack you. Because, if they can raise more troops than you and they want you to change a law, for example, or if they want to put somebody that they're backing onto the throne, well, if they think they can beat you in a fight, then they're a hell of a lot more likely to trigger a civil war in that case. So having a decently strong military compared to your vassals, it's not just about compared to your neighbours and rivals, it's also compared to your own vassals. That's quite an important feature. Being a feudal leader is a balancing act. You're trying to keep your own internal, minions happy as much as you're casting a wary eye on what your neighbours are doing. Now, you actually get this broken down a bit more in terms of individual vassals, and you can actually raise troops from individual vassals as well. So you can see who contributes the most. And at the moment, it's the Duchy of Östergötland, and some of them are contributing none at all, and that's because for these particular people, they just don't like you enough. There might be laws that are happening that prevent them, prevent you from getting like anything like the full troops. But in the case of theocratic vassals in particular, your various bishops and archbishops and whatever else, if they like the Pope more than you, and this is a mechanic specific to them, if they like the Pope more than you, and you can actually check that on the religion screen, you can directly see your religious vassals, then the Pope will get their income and you won't be able to raise troops from them. So that makes having bishops that like you particularly important if they are ones that, would contribute a lot of cash or a lot of troops otherwise. You can also, from this screen, hire mercenaries. Now, mercenaries are basically what they sound like. They are groups of soldiers that you can hire as long as you have the cash. They're quite expensive, at least for the bigger groups. And it's not just the upfront cost. They also have a monthly cost. So it might be possible to attack a larger neighbour by hiring mercenaries to bolster your numbers, for example, but you will need a big stockpile of cash with which to do it. Because if you run out of cash, well, best case scenario, the troops, the mercenary company just disbands and wanders back off to do their own thing. Worst case scenario, they decide you owe them a bunch of money and either go and work for your enemies or just actively turn on you themselves. It is possible to end up with mercenary companies holding land on the map through that happening. And you see it sometimes happening with the AI, where they've hired a mercenary company, they've run out of cash, and the mercenary company has turned around and taken some land from them because they've managed to beat them in a fight. So you have to be a bit careful with mercenaries, but they are a useful tool. There's also this tab, Holy Orders. There aren't any at the moment, but they will pop up, and what ones are available also depends on what religion you're playing as. The rules for them are slightly different. They cost, I believe it's piety to actually hire. So they're a cheap option, as it were, but you can only use them against religious enemies. You can't hire a holy order and go and fight another Christian ruler as a Christian. They've got their own specific rules in that regard. So they can be very useful sometimes, but it's much more of a limited set of circumstances. So if I was Sweden attacking like one of these filthy pagan rulers down here, for example, I could hire a holy order to do that. But if I was going to attack Denmark, the Holy Order would just sit there and do nothing. I could hire them still, it's just they wouldn't fight. So it would at that point be a waste of, time and piety. And I think maybe they cost money as well. Do they cost money? I honestly can't remember. I don't use Holy Orders very much. I don't get much occasion to. But I just thought I'd point it out. Now, there are navies in this game, but when I say navies, I really just mean transport fleets. It's literally just boats you raise to transport troops across bodies of water. They're really expensive to actually pay for when they're raised. So, again, you have to have a fair bit of cash if you're going to... Like, let's say you've gone all Deus full, you want to take Jerusalem from the filthy infidels, and so you've got to cart your troops all the way around here. That's going to be really expensive. Boats are way more expensive to keep raised than troops. You can kind of get around it by only raising vassals boats, but anytime you raise vassal boats or vassal troops, the longer that you raise them for, that has a ticking malus with it in terms of the opinion. So it starts off, like -1, but let's say you get embroiled in a really long war. By the time it's getting to -10 or -15 opinion, just from having their troops raised for a really long time, that can begin to affect the stability of the realm. And they just don't like it on also point of fact that, you've raised their troops and they're having to pay for it. So, it can be useful in the short term, and especially for boats, you should always try and raise vassal boats first, because they will pay for them. But, if you're having to move lots of troops around, you're just going to need everything, and it's going to be expensive. I think there is 1 or 2 mercenary companies that do come with their own... Yeah, there we go. So the Victual Brothers come with some of their own galleys. Is there another one? Yeah, some of these smaller ones can actually hire some very, very small groups of galleys. But they're still not cheap, especially 100 gold and 9 gold a month. The 9 gold a month isn't too bad, but for 10 galleys, it's not a lot. It's not a lot at all. The intrigue screen gives you basically a central area to look at various realm decisions that you can make. And you can actually invite people to courts. Like, let's say you've run out of competent military people, but you've got a bit of spare gold and prestige. You can click this promote commander button, and a new character will be generated by the game that has a decent martial score, for example. And you can also do the same thing with getting a young, eligible, marriageable lady to appear if, you're willing to throw a bit of gold away and take a chance that they will be half decent. And they are like, you're never going to get a really, really good character this way. If you want a really, really good character, you basically have to breed them like dogs, essentially. But, if you get stuck in a corner where you really need, you have literally no vassal bishops and you have nobody that's suitable to be your court chaplain, you can do it through this screen here. But there's also various other options that appear, and you can toggle whether or not you want them to pop up as notifiers at the top of the screen by clicking this button here. So if it's marked as important, if the decision becomes available, you'll get a notifier, and vice versa. If it's something you just don't care about, then you can uncheck it, and the game won't tell you if and when these things are available. And some of them, the various realm decisions to go on a hunt, for example, you can only do that at certain times of year. And at the moment, I could do that. I could go on a hunt at the moment, but I'm ill, so I can't. It would be a bad idea. Now, down here, you've got various tabs. If, let's say, and I'm going to click on my wife's character portrait. I'm going to bring her screen up. And this is the primary way where you target people for plots. And you can basically plot to assassinate just about anybody. But let's say I've decided I'm really fed up with my wife. I'm going to plot to kill her. That pops up on this screen here. And what you have to do for that specifically, in fact, for most plots, you can actually click, like you can go to a person's character portrait and go, right, I want to kill that person, and you can do it that way. But you can also just click the button on the plots tab, and it will give you a list of everybody, I think, within the realm that you can plot against. And you can also have other kinds of plots. So I can plot to revoke counties, for example, if I fulfill the right conditions. But mostly it's just plots to kill people. But I do have a potential plot to revoke a county here. So I could do that, for instance. And as you can see, well, it actually changes in terms of the plot power. And what plot power means in this scenario is that once it gets past a certain point, it dictates whether the plot will actually trigger or not. And the magic number is 100, obviously. But it can go over 100. And the higher the plot power, the more likely it is to trigger. But there are downsides, because people that you invite to a plot, and let's say, and you're looking for the green thumbs up in this case, you've also got the kind of the wavering hand, and you can basically pay people and they will go, okay, I will join your plot. So let's say the mayor of Visby, who would bring 9% plot power, I can click on him. I can I send him a gift? Oh, I can't actually send him a gift because I don't have enough money. But if I send him a gift, he would go, okay, I will join your plot. And at that point, he would add his 9% to that plot power. And you just have to keep adding people till it gets to over 100%. Sometimes there are plots that just will never fire because you can't get enough backing for them, no matter how many bribes you throw around. And you also have to be careful who exactly you're inviting. Because, well, first and foremost, you want people with a high intrigue power. Higher is good. But there are certain traits that will have a greater chance of people giving the game away, because it's possible for your plot to get revealed. And if the plot gets revealed, you can still go through with it, but everybody will know it was you. You basically want to, do these things, especially assassinations. You want to do these things and not have anybody know it was you. So it will have an effect. It will tarnish your reputation. People will know that you had somebody bumped off, and they will have a lower opinion of you as a result. And you might even get seen as a tyrannical ruler. So, in this case, there's also the option you can also auto-invite plotters, but that might invite people that you don't necessarily want. I think, I did look this up. There are a couple of specific traits that you do not want when you're inviting plotters because they have a much higher chance of giving the game away. And again, it's like that percentage chance when you are trying to fabricate a claim, for example. The game just checks every so often. Is this person going to give the game away? Is the plot going to fire yet? And you have to have over that 100% for that plot to fire. But even once you get to 100%, it doesn't just automatically happen. You still have to maybe wait a little while before it will fire off. So it's not automatic. There is an alternative when it comes to assassinations specifically, though. If you in the game setup screen, and this is how it used to be for a long time, there is also the option of allowing you to just try and hire some assassins directly. And what you do basically at that point is you go in the character screen, you right click and you say you want to assassinate this person, and at that point there is a percentage based chance of success or failure. It's really quite expensive. They kind of dumped the idea entirely for a while, and then they brought it back as an option, and you can actually have both options available within a game as well. You can have the plots to assassinate people, and you can also just hire assassins directly if you want to do it that way. On the rest of this screen, you can see other plots going on in your realm. There's actually this checkbox here, which for a new player I would recommend. Basically, I think it's your spy master will automatically ask people not to plot if they get discovered. And so if somebody is plotting to assassinate somebody else within your realm, your spy master will go to them and say, don't do that. There is the option, however, of leaving that unchecked and seeing what pops up, because it might be somebody that you want to throw in prison. And if you throw them in prison and they have a landed title, for instance, you might be able to strip that title from them, or else you might be able to throw them in prison and then banish them from the realm, at which point you get to keep all their money. So for a new player, yes, I would say click auto stop plots, but once you get a little bit more comfortable with the game, you can uncheck that and you can let the plots pop up and you can see, is there somebody that I would like to get rid of, or somebody whose land I would like to grab, or somebody whose money I'd like to grab. That is a way of doing it, by, catching them red-handed as they're plotting to assassinate another person, because they can't really complain if you banish them from the realm in that case. It's a way of, getting a bit of extra money and power without actually having to assassinate anybody yourself. You can also see any prisoners you might hold in your jails, and if you do have any, you've got the option to either execute them, ransom them, or just let them go. And you can finally see threats, and threats tells you if anybody, let's say adventuring characters, they are literally called adventurers, people that form basically like a little army to go and like knock over a piece of land somewhere, and they can pop up at various times and places, and they can actually originate from within your court as well. They can say, right, I'm going off to try and conquer this other bit of land, and sometimes they succeed. Sometimes you might see, say, a Norse character popping up down in southern Italy because they successfully invaded another realm as an adventurer. So that's where you'll see that if that pops up. Next, we have the factions screen, which is semi-related to the intrigue screen. Factions lets you see if any of your vassals specifically have formed, factions to, say, lower crown authority or put somebody else on the throne. You can have a chance to nip these things in the bud before they actually kick off into a proper civil war. And if there were any here, I could show you the various things that, it'll show you their relative power, their relative danger to you. And as with a lot of other stuff in the game, it's all in the tooltips. You just mouse over, you look at the tooltips, and you can decide whether you're going to imprison somebody or assassinate them or whatever to try and remove the danger. But of course, that can backfire on you, so you have to tread lightly. You do always want to try and keep your vassals on side. And if you are playing as a vassal yourself, you can have the option to join factions or found your own faction. You don't get that as a top-level ruler, of course, but it is a way to declare independence from a kingdom that you don't want to be a part of, for example, or to get somebody that you like on the throne, or to change the laws. So that's something maybe you're going to directly interact with more as a vassal, but it can also be extremely relevant if you're a top-level ruler, if you're a king or a duke, and you have rebellious vassals that are planning things. There's the religion screen, which I've already showed you a little bit of. It can have different effects. I can't even remember which DLC it is, but there's one of them that lets you, if you're a Christian ruler, you can try and get your bishops to be cardinals, and you can try and influence papal elections. And if you get a pope that you control, that can be a pretty powerful thing. That could be very, very useful. But just as a vanilla player, in this case, we can, because we have the free investiture law, we can appoint the successor to the bishops, the bishoprics that are in our land. But that's pretty much all we can do. You can see the moral authority of your various of your own faith, though, and that actually does have a modifier. So if I mouse over there and I leave it for a second, it should tell me, or not. No, okay, it's not going to, but that does have an effect on the realm as well. That can give bonuses or malices if it's a very low moral authority. And, if you get a pope that is unpopular, or you get a ruler that doesn't like the Pope very much, they can set up their own anti-popes as a specific Catholic thing, and that will have an effect on the moral authority. But also, winning holy wars or holding the various holy sites of a faith, that will increase the moral authority. So you might set that as your goal, for example. You might decide you really want to Deus Vult and go for Jerusalem, or if you had the Old Gods DLC, you might start as a pagan character and set out with the idea of reforming that religion to be, on a par with Christianity in terms of being an actual kind of established church. So there's all various things going on with religion, but outside of the effects that they have on the game setup, as a new player, you're not going to want to worry about that too much, but it can have some interesting ramifications later down the line. Lastly, there is the society screen. I think that again was monks and mystics that added a whole bunch of stuff. I don't know if societies pop up in vanilla games. They might do. It might just be there aren't any around yet. But yeah, societies can have various effects, and societies are more of a flavor thing. If you want to be a Satanist, you can do that, and you can sacrifice your own children for an increased lifespan and stuff like that. Or you can join the Hermetic Society and try and increase your learning and understanding of the world. And there are various event chains that will pop up that can have various different effects. So that's all within societies, but as a vanilla player, it's not going to come up very much. So there's been like an hour already, or at least an hour of me recording. It might be a slightly shorter video than that. But yeah, lastly, we'll have a look at some of the pop-ups, and we'll maybe look at a little bit at how the actual titles in this game work. And I'm aware there's probably a whole bunch of stuff I've just skipped over or glossed over. But the wiki, go and look at the wiki. If there's specific questions or mechanics that you want to know about in detail, it'll be laid out in far more a coherent fashion than I can probably manage it. So yes, the game tells you various things, and some of them are more important than others. So in this case, it's saying we can create 3 duchy titles, but at the moment we don't have the cash to do that. Creating titles always does give you a prestige bump, but if you hold too many, under some circumstances, it can actually be a negative thing. So let's say I am a king, because I am a king, and I created all of these duchy titles at once, if I had the cash. That would actually have a negative effect in that my existing vassals would think I'm holding all of these titles for myself, because I would be. And so therefore it would have a negative opinion modifier. So sometimes it can be better not to create a title, but it's a good way of getting chunks of prestige at once. You also might want to hold off in terms of top level titles. So let's say you're a duke and you have the ability to create another ducal title. You might actually want to hold off doing that for reasons of succession laws, because laws are tied to titles. So let's say I had another kingdom title. I would actually have another shield here, and I would be able to toggle between the two, and I might have 2 different sets of succession laws for those different titles, at which point, if my character dies and it's a different heir for each title, the kingdom gets split. So it's better to have just one title and one set of succession laws. In the long run, if you get a younger character and you create, say, a second kingdom title and have them alive long enough so that you can align the succession laws so that they are both primogeniture, for example, where the oldest eligible heir would inherit, in which case it's going to be the same character that inherits both. So if you can align the laws, it's fine, and it does have benefits having more than one primary title. But my point is that it's not necessarily automatically a good thing to jump in and create a bunch of titles the moment that you can. But in this case, because it's a bunch of sort of subordinate duchy titles, it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to create them, because then I could award them to vassals, and this would actually decrease the number of direct vassals. So let's say I'm running out of my vassal limit, for argument's sake, and I could create a duchy title, hand that duchy title over to somebody, and basically consolidate things. It would have a benefit in that regard. But you do have to be a bit careful that you don't have vassals. Let's say that I don't have a duke that has duchy titles that cover the entire country, because at that point they would kind of more or less de facto be the ruler. I mean, I'd still be the ruler, but at that point they'd be thinking, well, how come I'm not the king? So you don't want individual vassals to get too powerful. So you're trying to keep things a bit split up. You're trying to keep things from getting too consolidated in terms of that regard. So it can be good to hand out subordinate level titles, but you don't want them to consolidate too much in one place. So on to how titles work themselves. And I think we'll make this the last thing, because there's other various things I could go on about, like marriage and whatever else. But, I want people to discover some things themselves. And as I say, there is a lot of information on the wiki. So titles. How do titles work? Well, you've got various levels. At the very top, you have empire titles. And you can actually see there are map modes that tell you the de jure areas that those titles cover. So if I click on de jure empires, for example, well, the HRE is there, and Byzantium is there, and those are both existing imperial titles. And it basically means, an emperor can have kings and dukes and counts and barons as vassals, whereas a king can only have dukes and counts, for example. A king can't have another king as a vassal. So it basically dictates who you can have as a vassal. But there are also benefits to having higher level titles. But as far as the vanilla game goes, it basically only ever is the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire that exist. But you can create empires. And basically how you do this is you control all of this land. And if you control a sufficient majority of this land, I could then, for instance, declare myself the Emperor of Scandinavia. So that de jure, I don't know why I dragged that over, I don't know, anyway. That de jure word or phrase, it basically just refers to the given area of land that title covers. And that can actually shift. There are rules in the game setup where if, say, the Kingdom of Norway did not exist as a title, and I, as Sweden, held all of this land for a long enough period of time, de jure drift comes into play, and so that would all de jure become part of the Kingdom of Sweden. And so if somebody wanted to recreate Sweden, let's say that the Swedish title got destroyed somehow, they would then have to hold a lot more land to be able to recreate that title. So it's basically from empires down through to duchies. Wow, my voice is really starting to go, but then I have been talking for an hour. But below duchies, you also have counties, which are the individual provinces, and then you have the actual baronies within those. So you can basically have an unlimited number of barons as vassals. And if I build another castle holding here, for example, I've not even really talked about holdings either, the upgrades that you can build, but that's all reasonably self-explanatory, I think. So yeah, if I build another barony level holding and hold it myself, that does count towards my domain limit. But if I make that like a baron vassal of mine, it doesn't count towards the vassal limit. It only counts and higher. You also can't be, as a player character, a baron. You can only be a count. If you are in the circumstance where you have a county title and then a separate barony title in a different county, and you lose the main county title and you've only got the barony title left, at that point you lose the game. So it's a bit of an edge case, but it could theoretically happen. So you always need to be at least a count to keep playing the game. So, the titles all have their own laws. You can try and engineer, in terms of titles you hold, as I've said, the laws to align so that you have multiple titles being inherited by the same person. But there are other ways to get titles under your control as well. I've already kind of said how you can fabricate a claim, but you can also... if you use, the character finder, you can try and get people into your court that have existing claims on a title. And you can press their claim, and it may or may not become a part of your kingdom, depending on some secondary factors. So you can, and that can happen to you as well. Other people can declare a war on you and try and press claims against you that either they have or the people in their court has. And basically, it's like going back to my sons. They all will, I think, end up with... well, they might not do, actually, because we're elective. But if we were primogeniture, I'm pretty sure they would all have basically a claim on the throne, because they're all the sons of a king. So you can end up with civil wars happening that way, where various sons are contending over who gets the throne. But generally speaking, more titles is good. But you really have to be careful about how and where you add them, and how exactly you're dispersing subsidiary titles amongst your vassals. And of course, marriage comes into this as well. If you can marry somebody that has claims, or if you can marry in a non-matrilineal fashion, which I should probably explain what that means in a second. If you say marry your son, who is your heir, to a countess, and it's just a normal marriage, let's say I'm married to, or even like a duchess, down here, for example, upon your son becoming, let's say, the King of Sweden, and let's say his wife, then dies, their son, just assuming they're having a son after all this, would inherit both. So you've got to also play the long game a bit in this. If you can look for those opportunities, marriage is also a way to increase your landholdings, to get more titles under your control through inheritance. And that can go all the way up to kingdom level titles. This is one of the reasons why Iberia can be an interesting place to start, because all these three brothers, in fact, I think it's four brothers, because they're all, Navarra comes in as well, and Aragon. Wow, I forgot it's actually five. Anyway, you can end up with, these ones, these brothers all inheriting bits of each other's land because they're all busy killing each other. And then once you get various heirs coming into play, well, the situation gets a bit more complicated. But that's why this can be fun, is you end up with this situation to start with where you can assassinate people and take their land and just inherit it directly. Or else, you end up doing things with their heirs to try and inherit it. So, I think that's about it. I think that's about as far as I want to go. I did want to try and keep this at under an hour, and instead we've gone slightly over. But yeah, it's a game with a lot of various parts to it. And as I said, it really is also a game that benefits from you, the player, kind of knowing what you want out of it in any given playthrough. Because, as I said at the top, you might not necessarily want to go on a conquering rampage. You might want to play a more diplomatic game, or you might want to see how far you get with just inheriting. Or you might want to fiddle with one of the game setup rules and see what effect that has. And later on, once you've gotten the hang of it, well, you might want to go and come back and play as a Merchant Republic, for instance, with the appropriate DLC. Or you might want to start on the Indian subcontinent, or, you might want to start as a vassal, essentially, of China, which is one of the things the most recent update added, was basically China exists as an off-map entity, and there are various things that can happen with that. So there is a lot of scope with this game. There's a reason why you see screenshots of people posting it, with like hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of hours played, because it just has... it's a sandbox. It's a sandbox with near infinite variety. And even though you might start off with the same bookmark 10 times in a row, you're never going to get the same experience twice. There's always something different that's going to happen. And there's enough depth and variety of events and things that can happen in this game that even now, 6 years on, having played like 1,000 hours of it myself, very occasionally there are still things that pop up that just catch me completely flat-footed and are completely unexpected. And so... the fact that Paradox has given this away for free, well, I mean, you really can't go wrong for that price. So that concludes this very quick and dirty getting started guide, where I didn't even really play through it at all. I just kind of explained the various bits of the game. But there are loads of playthroughs of CK2 on YouTube. It's not hard to find very good quality channels where people are explaining what they're doing as they're doing it. And hell, I've got my own little humble series as well, where I have tried to explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it, but it is with an older version of the game, so you're probably better off looking elsewhere first if you're looking for more kind of a tutorial style gameplay, things being explained as it's being played video. So hopefully you found this useful. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments below. You can hit the like button. You can sub to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, stay tuned for more.